I kind of want to tell a story that I've never told before in full on my channel. They've been bits and pieces as we've gone, but as a part 2 to my story in coming to France, opening businesses, surviving, making money as a content creator, I thought I would share with you not only how I got to France today, but how I've managed to open a business, keep it going, and survive despite the French government trying to shut me down twice, not intentionally. They're not coming after me, but we'll get to that. I've been here long enough now to become French, which is good because when I first got here, my goal was to get French citizenship and to hang on to it. That's really all that mattered to me. When I came here, I really wanted to write my books and just focus on that. But in order to get my French citizenship, I had to be paying taxes, which means you have to make money. And unfortunately, writing doesn't make much money. And YouTube started making money. So I started pursuing that a little bit more. So today I wanted to go into how I got here to where I am, how I almost didn't, twice, if not more, and then some major lessons that I've learned along the way. This is part 2 in a series of how I've learned more or less to handle money, business, how I got to France and made it stick, and how I think you can do 1 or 2 of those things as well, or all of them if you really want to, whether you're interested in making content as a profession or you want to move abroad and live somewhere. There's some cautionary tales in this. I would not recommend doing it the way that I have done it. Hopefully you can learn from my mistakes. So first, how I made it. Basically, how did I make money when I got here, and how was that all structured? What did it look like? How was I legal? And also not starving. Because the starving part was kind of real at the beginning. When I first got here in 2017, I had a promise of getting an English teaching job that fell through, not permanently, but temporarily, in the sense that I showed up in March, so my anniversary, my 8-year anniversary of coming back to France just passed on March 1st. Congratulations to me, hooray. I immediately hit the ground trying to figure out both my visa situation, that took up a lot of brain power, but also the job situation. And so before I could even go and talk to the lady that would eventually hire me to be an English teacher at an engineering school just outside of Paris, she wanted me to set up my auto-entrepreneur, which is a structure that no longer exists under that name. It's now called micro-entreprise. So it's basically the freelance structure. In France, they don't treat you like a business just for existing, whereas in the US, you're a sole proprietor by definition. Like as an individual, you can have a business that's worth hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars just yourself. Of course, there's no liability protection, so it's recommended you form like an LLC. In France, they don't have that middle step. They've got kind of the equivalent of an LLC and then nothing below that. You can be an employer or an employee. But being the freelance, that's something that they kind of have been figuring out over the last decade. So because I was going to be a contractor, she asked me to get that set up. That took me a month. And by April, I was like, all right, I'm ready to start teaching English. And she was like, great, we'll hire you. In October, because obviously there's no school over summer. Well, maybe not obviously, but it came as a surprise to me. So I scrambled. I was like, well, what do I do for work? So I ended up being a tour guide through that summer. I had this structure now so I could legally work as a tour guide. I didn't know if I was allowed to do any of this, to be honest, because I was on a talent visa. But when I went into the URSAF office, and URSAF is going to come up multiple times in this story. But when I went in, they didn't stop me. They're like, yeah, we'll set up your business structure. You're good to go. URSAF is basically the office that handles social charges. So there are 2 major chunks of charges that happen: taxes, impôts, and then social charges. Social charges is like 22% under that structure, and then taxes is like 7%. So 30% of what you're making, gone. You can't deduct anything, however. It's just a flat tax on revenue, basically, is how you can think about it. So I got that set up. I started doing tours, and then I think towards the end of 2017, I started teaching English in the fall, which was a relief because, as you may know if you watched the bankruptcy video, I was struggling under a mountain of debt, was not making any money that entire summer, and was only eating what I got tipped. And so I managed to pick up some extra work along the way, some projects. I taught a Kickstarter course for a tech startup back in the States. And through all of this, I was vlogging daily. So I was making a video every day. I started in the middle of 2016, continued vlogging daily all the way for 54 weeks. Took a break because I didn't even have 1,000 subscribers at that point. I think I'm the slowest growing YouTube channel in the history of YouTube. And then during that summer, I hit rock bottom multiple times. I have hit it more than once in my life. But every time you hit rock bottom, it's a lesson both in like, oh, how much better things can get, but also you can find another level to rock bottom. Like there are different layers to bedrock, and you can crush your way through some of those if forced down hard enough. 2017 was a very, very dark chapter of my life. I'm so glad that I'm not that person anymore, but it was a part of it. And so I got back to vlogging because even though I took a break, like I saw that number tick over 1,000 without uploading any more videos. And I was like, okay, there's something here. That insane part of any YouTuber's brain where you believe there's something here, despite the fact that like there's no empirical evidence. And I just kept going. So I kept daily vlogging through all of these, what I considered side hustles. Through all this, while I was daily vlogging, in that second season of daily vlogging, I made a commitment to pitching Patreon every couple of weeks at a minimum, because I had done a terrible job of promoting it. And the reality is that if you don't ask, you don't get. And I learned that from my volunteering days when I lived in West Africa. Raising support, I had to overcome that fear of asking, because in reality, if you don't, you're not going to go anywhere. Which is a great moment to plug Patreon. Thanks to today's patron producer, Ann S., and all my patrons for being a huge part of this time of my life. And if you are not a patron of mine and you're thinking of it, I would really appreciate it. I just started some exclusive content over there that you can only get by being a patron. It's coffee chats with me, kind of in the same setting, but I'll make coffee and just talk unfiltered about life, stuff that I'm not sharing on my channel, basically, for a number of reasons, which you'll find out if you go over there, become a patron, and then you get to watch them. As I started pitching Patreon more regularly, my patronage started to grow, and I went from being like maybe $100 a month to something more significant, to the point that in 2018, I said, if I can get to $2,000 a month, I will quit everything else and just focus on YouTube. And I did, which is really, really cool. We made it, I think, the winter of like 2019, that rolling over. Awkwardly enough, I don't think I ever actually quit the English teaching job. I think they found out because I'd made that deal publicly with my audience. I had said I will quit if I get to this point. And I think they just were like, all right, fuck them. And they just didn't come back and ask me to keep teaching after that. It was a really weird dynamic. I never got the chance because we never had that conversation. Before the pandemic, I also had 2 book projects. There was a sci-fi book that I had written for a publisher. They had rejected it. It was pretty well ready to go. So we went through some more editing, kickstarted it, sold it. That was Couriers Off-Grid, which a number of you have as a result. Into the pandemic, we kickstarted Sea of the Unknown. The reason this is important is because I didn't really make any money. Like, if you don't know anything about Kickstarter and projects and products, it's a whole other conversation. From the outside, it looks like, wow, those people raised a bunch of money and now they're rich. In reality, the money that you raise, at least in the past, now it's kind of a marketing thing, but in the past, you're actually raising money to make the project a reality. So if you raise like 12 grand, which I think is about what I raised for one of those books, the vast majority of that goes into, well, you've got taxes, and then you've got to make the book itself. That requires paying your editor, your line editor, your cover designer, all these people. Then you have to print them and ship them, deal with all the logistics. And by the end of it, you might end up with a couple $1,000, which is great. That's, like a good 10 to 20% profit margin on a project like that. I don't think is actually bad, especially at a lower volume where we were at. The problem is that in that auto entrepreneur status, remember I said I couldn't deduct anything. They just treated that as my income. And there was a limit to how much you're allowed to earn in that status. And so that pushed me over the status. So I didn't have any money, really, but it looked like I had money, to the French government. And they said, you can't do that. Don't do that again, or we're going to come after you. And I said, okay, we need to change things. That was a really stressful period. And thankfully, the accountant that I found at that time, I think through Richard actually, was very generous. They helped me set up my new business, an EURL, which is like a sole proprietor LLC kind of an equivalent. They set that up for pretty cheap. Like, they gave me a discount. I remember how stressed I was in that period. Unfortunately, that is a recurring theme in my life that I would like to bring to an end here. We got the businesses switched. Everything seemed fine. And it seemed like a really great switch, because now I could deduct my life from my business. Like, so much of my eating and drinking and all these things were now tax deductible, because like it's part of my job, going out eating. And the way that the system is set up in France is way more generous than what the IRS has. So you're able to spend a lot more on your business than you would be in the States for things that generally wouldn't be permitted. You might have thought that that was the moment that I was going to say, and then the French government tried to kill me. It didn't happen. Then it happened shortly thereafter. We hit the pandemic. I'm stuck in this tiny little room. We're all under lockdown. Nobody knows what's going to happen. Thankfully, I'm in a position where, by continuing to share that experience and my life, my patrons especially, I lost a lot of patrons when I actually stopped daily vlogging. I think my patronage went down by about 30% very, very quickly. So that was terrifying. But it also told me there was a floor. Like, there are a certain number of people that are going to stick around just to see where this goes, even if I'm not daily vlogging. Thank you for being among them, if you're one of those people. But like, that was pretty scary. Getting into the pandemic, don't know what to do with myself. We kickstart a book. And honestly, for me, getting locked down was kind of a gift, because I'd been traveling a lot, vlogging a ton. I couldn't stop myself. I hadn't started therapy yet. I was still running from myself very, very much. And so there was this sense that I really needed to just stop. And it took a global pandemic to make me stop. It's not great, not the healthiest, but it worked. And so I did. So we're hanging out in lockdown, and one of the things that I've always wanted to do, I've had this idea for a game for a long time. If you've been following, you saw this come out in 2019 when we did an analog version. We had stickers with different vendors around the city, places that I recommend. If you went in, you gave them the passcode, they would give you a sticker, they'd give you kind of a special deal for coming in, a discount, a freebie, whatever. And we were kind of doing an analog version of what I've always imagined doing as an app. I've had this idea since the first time I lived in Paris. I bought a domain back then. I started developing the idea. I've been thinking about it then for 13 years, I guess, at this point. And I really, really, really wanted to do it. And I still want to do it. But at that time, I was like, oh, well, we have a little bit of time. Nothing's going on. People aren't here. This is a great time to actually start developing this. And I had a little bit of money I've been able to save. So I was like, okay, well, I've got this chunk of money here to get started. I think I had like $5,000 or something that I hired a app development studio to get started. Made a prototype in Figma, and then we hired this development studio. Things were starting to move, and I was like, okay, all I need is just a little bit more money to really get this to an MVP, a minimum viable product, where we could really test it out, play with it. So I needed something like, 20 grand, like 10,000 for the first milestone, and then we'd figure out the next milestone. And at the same time, Patreon started this program called Patreon Advance, where they were quietly, they didn't advertise this, but they reached out to creators and they're like, hey, if you want, we'll give you an advance against your earnings so you can do a project, whatever it is you're thinking. It was not the best terms, it was not the cheapest loan, but they were like, hey, we'll give you like a certain amount based against like a year of your earnings, and you can do whatever project you're thinking. And I was like, this is cool. I definitely want to do this. So I think I qualified for about $18,000, and I was like, yeah, I mean, I'm stuck at home. I'm not spending any money anyways. I can definitely take that reduction in my income. So what that advance against your earnings means is that, let's say Patreon pays you $1,000 a month, you take out this loan against that, and so then they just cut that down to like $500 a month, and then everything over the top of that they take to pay back the loan, which is really dangerous. Advances are very dangerous. This is something that I've learned the hard way, as you will find out here in a second, because basically no sooner did I write that first check and send it to the app developer, and we got started on like the next level of this application we've been developing, did I get a letter from URSSAF, French government, the social charges, who let me know that they wanted me to pay them 24,000 euros. And they'd already put it on a payment plan. It was money that I owed them and money I would owe them, all bundled into a 2-year payment plan. So it was like it was over 1,000 euros a month that was going to be coming out of my bank account. And it's the government, so there's no stopping it. That was terrifying. What made it more terrifying was that the next day, as I'm scrambling and asking my accountant what the hell is going on, I get another letter, also from URSSAF, saying, by the way, we also need you to pay us 8,000 euros this week. Cash money. As you may recall, I don't have 8,000 euros lying around. Now, that's actually not entirely true. I did have a chunk from this loan, so I hadn't spent all of it. Had a little bit of the advance, but it was not enough. I had already garnished my wages, so that, 1,000 whatever that was going to come out every month was also way more than I could afford. I found myself in a really, really bad spot. And so it turns out my accountant did not make it clear to me. I mean, in her defense, maybe at some point she said something. She must have said something along the way, but basically during COVID, they paused payments to URSSAF. And I know a number of people that got caught by this. I'm not alone in this, but ultimately it's my responsibility. I should have figured this out. I should have known. As a business owner, it all falls back to you. But I was not aware of the fact that I was supposed to be saving the equivalent amount of what I should have been paying that whole time, so that when they came after it later, I could pay it. That was never made clear enough to me. I would have definitely done that. I would not have put myself in the position that I was in. So we scrambled to figure it out. Thankfully, she helped to get things put on a payment plan. My bank couldn't give me much of a professional loan, because the way that loans work in France is very relationship based. And that means that they need to see you exist for a while. It's really hard. I don't know how people start businesses sometimes, because unless you already have a business and something that's been going for a long time, out of the gate, nobody's financing you. And it's a 3-year minimum kind of a thing before they open the gates to financing. And so because I had a personal account for a long time, they gave me a loan on the personal account. There was a little loan on the professional account. So I took out enough money to kind of smooth everything over, give myself a little bit of padding. The percentage on that was I think 2% on the loan. So it was less than inflation. So it was actually a really good deal. Saved my bacon. Left me with this massive payment that I was going to be making. It ended up being closer to 1,600 euros when they rebundled it. So 1,600 euros a month was coming out for URSAF. Just on that, not to mention the additional URSAF payments that I had to make on my own. Like there was, at one point, we had it in a spreadsheet. Like Emily and I were tracking this, obviously, and got very good at the numbers. But I think for a good 6-month period there, it was $2,500 a month that was going straight to URSAF between that payment, my own actual social charges, which is ridiculous that it gets doubled down on like that. And then Ariana, when she was my first contracted employee, I had to contribute for her as well. That was a very expensive time when I was not keeping a lot of the money that I was making. So that was the first time that the French government almost brought me to my knees. And then the second time happened recently, and it wasn't the government that got me the second time. I told a story about this recently, but fast forward, like we've kind of navigated this. We've managed to figure it out. Things are still growing. They're going okay. And in the third part of this series, if you're interested, let me know below. I'm happy to go into how I actually make money, like what the percentages look like, the different revenue streams, how things are structured, how we're going to end up restructuring things in the not too distant future, because I've outgrown this structure that I'm in right now, which is a source of a lot of the pain that I've been going through. And that's what I've discovered recently was about this time last year, as we geared up to spin Paris in My Pocket off. And I was focusing on, okay, Ariana, let's do short form content for real. Let's like really make this, let's take this seriously. It meant that I was going to stop vlogging for a while. We were turning down sponsors because our relationship with our sponsors was kind of in a different place. The Olympics were coming up, and the Olympics are famously not good for local economies. There's just a lot going on all at once. And so I saw this coming, and I knew that we were going to have a dip in revenue. I didn't know how dramatic it was going to be, but I knew it was going to be pretty bad. So I went to my new accountant, because I'd had a new accountant for a few years at this point, because I did fire the old one after we sorted it through and was like, this can never happen again. The new accountant had gotten a little bit more hands off. And what I have also learned about French accountants, we'll save that for the lessons learned. Long story short, I went to the accountant and said, I need my numbers so I can go to the bank. Like, give me my official P&L basically, so I can go to the bank and get a loan to get me through this period. Like, if it's going to be a low interest loan, it can help kind of just keep me from bleeding out over the summer, get things up and moving, and like we'll be fine. That turned into a 3-month battle just to get my profit and loss statement correct, because they made some massive errors on it. The bank caught them, which is good that they caught them, but they found these things that were, once they pointed them out to me, were clearly ridiculous. Ended up in some back and forth. The accountant never took responsibility for it. Ended up just kind of low-key ghosting, and we had to scramble to get a new accountant, figure this all out. But it took months. And so as those months went on, as we got into the summer, as revenue went down, expenses stayed the same, I was still paying things like URSAF, like these massive bills every month to the government and everything else from debts that I'd been carrying forever. It started getting pretty dire. So I started taking out some short-term advances. Again, advances against your earnings. We can talk about this. But my American bank for my American company gave us a line of credit that was basically a cash advance. Also very expensive. A repayment plan of 6 months. So very quick. I just had to kind of go from that, living on a credit card a little bit, just kind of cobbling everything together just to make payroll, because I had to pay my people and I wanted to pay my people. I canceled a couple projects and actually stopped working with a few people just because I couldn't pay everybody. I made sure everybody got paid, but then the people that I needed to pay were getting paid, and I was not living off much. And so that's why I ended up in the hospital in October, is because I was just so stressed. I hit this peak level of just constant stress about payroll, especially. We really came that close to, I don't know what we would have done. I don't know. We just didn't have any money, and it got really, really, really tight. And that's just, I think, also kind of a classic business situation. These things happen. And I'm really proud of myself because I reoriented, figured out, again, canceled some projects, had the hard conversation to ask people to work less or to take a little bit less pay. I took as little pay as I possibly could while still paying my debts and so forth. Got everything down to the bare minimum and then just ground it out. The entire winter was just grinding is the only way I can put it. Staying home, working on what I could at home, resting as much as I could because I'd really taxed my body to the limit, and just trying to make it through. We made a plan, we stuck to it, we paid down the debts, we've discharged almost all the debt now, which is really good. And things are starting to grow again, which is the bright side. I saw how as we pay down this debt, even if revenue just stays flat, we'll gain more headspace and breathing room as a result. Very hard to stick that out, but we managed. And I'm very proud of us for doing that. Which brings us to lessons learned. And one of the lessons learned on this is to ask as many questions as possible and don't stop Don't be embarrassed, especially if you're in France. But no matter where you are, if you're not like an economically minded person, if you were not raised with financial literacy, as I was not, don't be afraid to look stupid. Just ask all the questions. And if you don't understand, keep asking. Find different ways of asking, especially if it's in a foreign language and in a system that is different. Because the French system is very similar, but it tricks you into thinking that it's not that different. And that lulls you into a sense of false security that leads you into traps. And I've walked into a few of those traps myself. And it's my fault because I was too proud to keep asking questions, or because I just assumed that I understood what was going on. Don't over leverage yourself is point number 2. There's a big difference in my stories between when I went bankrupt before and when I just went through what I went through now. And that is that I actually had revenue this time around. I have a business, technically 2 businesses that are doing well. I want to say very well, but like they're doing well enough, and I have consistent revenue, even if it fluctuates, like money's coming in. And so taking some bets on that, taking a loan against your business as it's going is normal. You need to grow, to take projects on, whatever. But you don't want to overdo it. You don't want to put yourself in a position where you cannot pay it back. I did not do that this time. As close as we may have come just because of circumstances and my revenue dropping during the Olympics and all that other stuff. 2023, I made as a business, I didn't take this home, but the business brought in about $150,000. This year, 2024, we brought in just over $90,000. That's a massive drop in revenue. That's like 3 times what I pretty much take home as a salary lost in the business. That's catastrophic and very difficult to survive. I'm very proud of us for surviving it. Editor's note, if you're curious as well, this leads into the next lesson learned, but the problem is that I actually spent a ton of that money. 2023, at the end of 2023, we'd saved a lot, but made some of the biggest investments and purchases that I have ever made. We did like this podcasting tour that cost us a chunk. Jeff and I got into coaching, which also cost a fair amount. And then an even bigger purchase that I will talk about soon. And it was a personal one. It's a whole video in and of itself. But all that to say, maybe, and I knew it at the time. I knew I should have said no to a couple of those things just to keep something a bit. Keep money in the business. But it's keeping liquidity in the business is another thing that I've learned from this. You want to make sure that you have money, like some buffer to absorb shocks. You don't have to turn to a loan. You don't want to rely on the banks because, especially if you end up with a screwy French accountant. And now my relationship with my bank is probably in a really bad spot as a result of last year. I don't think that they're going to trust me for years because of this situation. You really got to be able to stand on your own 2 feet if you can. And when I said the difference, like back when I went bankrupt before, I was taking out loans, but against like ideas. And I was investing into a project that may or may not work. But if it didn't work, it meant that I was in debt and I could risk everything. And I didn't know really the difference back then. And now I do. Like the difference is like, obviously you can take risks and you should take big risks on yourself, but not so big that you find yourself losing everything. Especially later when people rely on you, like you're paying people, you don't want to risk everything because you're risking not just for yourself anymore. Another thing on like strategy, don't spend your money just to avoid paying taxes. There's this mentality that I had that a lot of people have, which is like you should avoid paying taxes at all costs. But in reality, if you're paying taxes, it means you're profitable. That's great. And taxes go to pay for things like the metro. I love the metro, or healthcare, or all kinds of great things. Not a perfect system. Obviously, it's not bad to pay some taxes. In fact, it's a good thing to pay some taxes. That reminder that you're still spending your own money and you're getting a tax deduction, but it's like a really inefficient and expensive way to avoid paying taxes. So trying to operate at zero or at a loss just for like the sake of owning taxes is actually a self-own. So I'm not going to do that anymore, at least. French accountants are a formality. Keep your own books. If you open a business in France, legally you have to have a French accountant, but keep your own books and keep very close attention to what goes where and how and why, so that if and when they screw up, you're able to come back around and be like, hey, I think this might be what actually is going on. As much as I wish we could rely on our professional services, I've learned I cannot leave my fate in the hands of others. Editor's note number 2, I forgot to mention this part, but what I just realized through the help of the consultants that I've been working with is that the first accountant either screwed up, I think she screwed up, and the second accountant kind of lied to me, because the way that they set up my business, there are 2 options. One is taxing on the revenue and the other is taxing on the business, which the main difference is that the second one is where you get actual deductions for what you spend. And they put me on the first one, which means that for 5 years, I was only getting a standard deduction. I wasn't actually getting the full deduction of everything that I spent on the business, which is a big difference, really big difference. And the reason that I say that they screwed up at a minimum and may have lied by omission at least is because the whole point of restructuring was to up my revenue cap and make sure that I was actually be able to deduct all my expenses. That was the whole point. That's how I got in trouble in the first place. And the second guy made a huge deal out of how we tracked our expenses. For what reason, I guess I don't know, because then he also ended up completely screwing that up. So anyways, yeah, that goes back to ask a lot of questions and don't fully rely on your French accountant. France is not friendly to small businesses. If you live here, or you want to live here, you want to be a small business owner. First, in French culture, there's not the same like respect for entrepreneurship here. People don't look at you and think like, oh wow, you fit into a weird gray zone. France is set up for major employers, like I said earlier, and employees. And they do a great job of protecting employees. But like those protections for employees and the way the system is set up for employers makes it really hard to operate in the middle. I can't afford to offer full-time contracts to my staff because it would cost me 150% of their salary to do so. And at my level, that's brutal. And also, we can talk about French contract law another time, but it's just massive risk, a wild encumbrance to hire people here. It's pretty insane. Also, if you're opening a business, even though it was COVID specific, that URSAF came after me for money later, in my conversations I had with multiple accountants and lawyers through that entire experience, and then a lot more business owners over time, URSAF is the number one thing that kills small businesses for everything we've been talking about, because the burdens and the way it's set up are meant for like bigger businesses. When you're a smaller business, they come in, they do not care about you and what's going on, the specifics of your situation. They just want their money and they're going to get it, and they can come after you for a very long time. I feel like every business owner I know has an URSAF story. Just heard a new one recently that actually was COVID related. They came after some guys I know for tens of thousands of euros. Years later, when they miss these things, when they make mistakes, there was one point where I got a mise en demeure from URSAF, which is like an overdue notice, which is a bad notice to get. The only reason I got it was because my bank, for whatever reason, didn't pay them one of my monthly payments. And so then they, instead of reaching out, asking, hey, what happened? Can we sort this out? Instead of trying to fix it, they just a month later sent me a letter saying you owe us everything now. Your payment plan is canceled. You owe us like 10 grand and you have to pay it right now because you missed a payment and it's your fault. They don't take responsibility, and so you got to really protect yourself. So I would say save a good 50% of everything you can, if not everything you make, for 2 years just to be ready for URSAF to come knocking. Which brings us back around to that fact that like opening a business in general is really hard. Opening one here is very hard. In the lessons that I've learned about how like I never understood, because I don't come from money. I don't come from a support structure. Without this apartment that my landlady has provided for me, this is the one lucky break that I've had, and it's been massive. Aside from that, I've been on my own, and I never understood how people could open businesses and run at such thin margins and survive. And it's because so many people don't actually have to live off their business. Like they have support, they have a spouse or family, money saved up, whatever it is, they don't need to live off their business. Now that I understand that, I can definitely see the value of taking the time to save up that money to open alternative avenues to surviving while you get a business up and running, specifically for what I just said, which is you have to save 50% of what you make for 2 years to pay the boogeyman in case he shows up. Like that's a tall order. That's very difficult to do. Very expensive. It's prohibitive. And that's one of the reasons why I actually would argue that you probably don't want to open a business in France. If you're small, if you're a massive investor and you have millions and you want to open a tech startup and you can afford to hire 10 people out of the gate, it's probably a much better landscape. If you're small and you're trying to do something solo and grow it from the ground up, good luck. And that brings me to my final lesson, which is something I've said before, but I think I've finally internalized in the last year, and I'm really grateful that I have, and that is that business failures are not moral failures. We often equate failing at business, like failing at relationships or anything else, as some sort of a moral failing, but in reality, we all make mistakes. Everything comes to its end. Unfortunately, sometimes those ends are less glamorous than others, but that doesn't reflect necessarily on you as a person or your moral character. So don't let these road bumps get you down. They will stress you out. They might put you in the hospital. They might shorten your life a little bit. But they don't make you a bad person. In fact, I would say that I'm grateful, genuinely, and with no cheese or woo-woo involved. I'm super grateful for the last year and this really challenging spell, because it's helped to highlight how much I enjoy my lifestyle, how much I love my freedom, how much I have missed both in being, I'm not trapped here, but like it has felt very stuck and very trapped for a long time. It's also forced me to learn some hard lessons that I guess I wasn't learning otherwise. And I'm sure there are more hard lessons on the way. And that is ultimately the glory, and why I really do like running my own business, is because it gives you a never-ending string of things to learn, never-ending ways to grow, and a great reminder that the world doesn't get easier, we get stronger. And I certainly feel stronger as a result of the last year. Even if I still have a little bit of fatigue and I still struggle to get out of bed some mornings because, man, it's been rough. But spring is here, summer's coming, great things are on the horizon, and I'm really looking forward to it. Which brings up that question: if you're interested in knowing more about like how I make money, what that actually breaks down to look like, and if I have any recommendations for aspiring content creators. I think I've given you enough of my insights on aspiring French business owners, although we can talk more about that if you're interested in it. Let me know in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you again to my patrons for being a cornerstone of my business and the emotional support structure of my life. My patrons have also made up some of the difference. And you have too, a lot of you watching, even if you haven't been patrons, through your comments, your kind words, everything else, you've helped to build a support network around me that was lacking from birth. And I'm deeply grateful for that. So whether you're a patron or not, thank you so much for watching. Thanks, of course, to the patrons on screen. And I'll see you bright and early again sometime soon for another video. Hopefully this video about how to do Montmartre sooner than later, because we're so close to launching the Guide Plus. And we're just so close.